Hello and welcome. I am so glad that you joined me today. We're continuing in our study of the book of Judges and we're looking at Samson in Judges chapter 15 today. So grab yourself a cuppa and we'll get started. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to reading some of your comments. A trigger warning for today is that this study will contain some references to some violence and it will include some animal cruelty. So in the last chapter, we have just seen that Samson has been married and he tricked his hosts with a riddle about where he had got some honey from. And then his host tricked him in return by manipulating his wife. And then Samson went and killed 30 Philistines to pay off this bet. And in anger, he then left Timnah and returned to his parents' house, leaving his new bride at home at her father's house. So verse 1. Later on, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, "I'm going to my wife's room," but her father would not let him in. So it's interesting to note that Samson chooses to go visit his wife. It's interesting to note the time he does it. It's at the time of the wheat harvest, a time when all strong and able-bodied men would be helping reap the harvest. And this is very demanding work, and Samson's strength would have been really helpful to the community. However, he chooses this time to leave the work of Israel to everyone else, and he goes pursues his Philistine wife. And this reveals sort of his self-centered nature. He's willing to gratify his own desires with no regard to anybody else. So Samson, he's bringing a young goat with him, so perhaps it's a gesture to restore relations with his wife, like a posy of flowers might be used to win back a girl's favour. Verse 2, the father says, "I was so sure that you hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your companion. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." So remember that Samson had killed 30 Philistine men because his wife had betrayed him. And Samson ran back home to his parents' house. So it might be understandable that her father thought that Samson hated her and didn't want her anymore. But he does go home, he does go back and he does go to visit his wife, only to find that her father has given her to one of his companions. And in the last chapter, we noted how both Samson and his wife didn't really appear to be fully loyal and committed to each other, and they hadn't put their marriage above their relationship. And now we see that Samson's father-in-law is doing the same thing. He too seems to take the covenant of marriage quite lightly, and he then offers his younger daughter to Samson as compensation. He says, "Oh, isn't her younger sister more attractive?" And just like Samson, he also values beauty above all other personal qualities. Verse 3, Samson said to them, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." So Samson, he's misguided in his right to get angry. He thinks that his anger can be blamed on other people's actions, but our anger is our responsibility. We are responsible of how we handle our emotions, and we cannot blame others for our uncontrolled emotional outbursts. No one has the right to take vengeance on another. So we're going to do a little bit of a study about revenge and how it's talked about in the Bible. Revenge is the action of punishing by hurting or harming someone in return for an injury or wrong suffered by their hands. And people commit acts of revenge to make themselves feel better, but it tends not to solve the original issue. Often people don't achieve anything positive or anything lasting from taking revenge. It does not soothe the sense of injustice, and it costs us our sense of peace. So Samson takes vengeance on the Philistines from a more personal vengeance point of view. He does it 3 times. We see it here in Judges chapter 15 verses 5 to 3. He wants to take revenge on the Philistines because his wife was taken by another man. We see it a little bit later on that he wants to take revenge on the Philistines because they burnt his wife and his father-in-law. And in the next chapter we see that Samson wants to take revenge on the Philistines because of what they did to his eyes. But he never really takes vengeance for really any righteous reason. So what does the Bible say about taking revenge or about vengeance? Well, let's look at Deuteronomy 32 verses 35a. God says, it is mine to avenge. He says, I will repay. Romans 12 verse 19 says, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. Hebrews 10 verse 30 says, for we know him who said, it is mine to avenge, I will repay. And again, the Lord will judge his people. And Job even says, right at the beginning of the Bible, even now my witness is in heaven and my advocate is on high. And we need to leave vengeance to God because we cannot see clearly. Revenge only tries to satisfy our sinful passions. Because we are sinful creatures, it is impossible for us to take revenge with pure motives. Human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. We see that in James 1 verse 20. And unlike us, God never takes vengeance from impure motives. God knows the situation much better than we do. And as Christians, we are to follow the Lord Jesus. And we're commanded to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. We see that in Matthew 5 verse 44, leaving vengeance to God. Verse 4, so he went out and he caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. Then he fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torch, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain by the Philistines. He burnt up the shocks and the standing grain together with the vineyards and the olive groves. So I think we can safely presume that Samson would not have been a member of any local animal rights activist group. This took some planning. Whether he sought help from others or found the 300 foxes himself, it would have taken some considerable time and effort to execute. And whenever did he ever think to rethink his revenge plan? He never examined his motives or considered how this scheme might actually pan out. He burnt the standing grain, the shocks, the vineyards, and the olive groves. So the shocks, they are the stacks of the sheaths of grain that have been harvested and left to dry in the field, while the standing grain refers to the crop that is still growing and has not been cut yet. And for an agricultural community, this is economically devastating. The current year's harvest, as well as the seed for the future harvest, was destroyed. The vineyards and the olive groves, these take several years to mature and reach their full productive potential. He's done a lot of damage. Verse 6, when the Philistines asked who did this, they were told Samson, the Timnite son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companion. So the Philistines went up and burnt her and her father to death. So in retaliation to the loss of property, the Philistines, they burn Samson's ex-wife and the ex-father-in-law to death, and then later on they go and attack Judah. So misguided vengeance is never a soothing balm. It will potentially antagonize the other party, encouraging them to take further excessive retribution. It does not dispense justice fairly. And so, the retribution, it continues again. Verse 7, Samson said to them, since you have acted like this, I swear that I will not stop until I get my revenge on you. He attacked them viciously and he slaughtered many of them. And then he went down and he stayed in the cave in the rock of Etam. So where it says that Samson viciously slaughtered many of them, the Hebrew says he slaughtered them hip and thigh. It's uncertain whether he killed them or whether he just maimed them by breaking their hip bones and gashing their thighs, but either way, he did some damage, some incredible damage. Samson now seeks refuge in a cave in Etam, which is in Judah. Samson's not from Judah, remember, he's a Danite, so he's hiding amongst another tribe. Verse 9, the Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi, and the people of Judah asked, why have you come to fight us? We have come to take Samson prisoner, they said, to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, do you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us? And he answered, I merely did to them what they did to me. Now, it's again the Philistines' turn to take revenge. See, when you take God out of the picture, the cycle of retaliation, it never stops. It's a recurring pattern of harm and punishment where one person's actions in response to another one, it triggers another series of retaliatory acts. And in pursuing Samson, the Philistines are drawn to Judah. And Judah never invited this conflict. It had little to do with them. So they ask the Philistines why they have come to fight them. And they find out that the Philistines are actually in pursuit of Samson to do to him as he did to us. So 3,000 men from Judah, they band together and they seek out Samson from Etam. And they try to make him understand the position that he's put them in. The Philistines are more powerful than Judah, and Judah is vulnerable to their attack, all because of Samson's reckless anger. Samson explains himself by saying, I merely did to them what they did to me, as if to say that his vengeance was proportional and justified, but it wasn't. Verse 12, they said to him, we've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. And Samson said, swear to me that you won't kill me yourself. Agreed, they answered. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you. So they bound him up with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. So the men of Judah apprehend Samson. They promise not to kill him themselves, and they turn him over to the Philistines. The men of Judah agree to hand him over to the Philistines, presumably to appease the Philistine army and deter them from attacking Judah directly. They are willing to hand over one of their own Israelite brothers for the hope of preserving their own life. So they tie him up with 2 new ropes because they thought that a single rope maybe wasn't going to be sufficient to restrain this powerful Samson, so they used 2. 14. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and the ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. What a sound it must have been to hear the Philistine army coming toward him shouting. We're not told how many Philistines they were, but I think it's fair to assume that it was larger than the 3,000 men that Judah had mentioned earlier. So it was a sizable army, and it would have made for an intimidating sight and sound. Just the rumble of their footsteps would have been daunting enough, but the shouting would have been terrifying. But we see that even in his foolishness, God has never left Samson. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him, and the 2 ropes became brittle and they fell off. Samson finds a jawbone of a donkey and he uses it as the only weapon to defend himself from the Philistines. Again, here we see Samson defying the rules of his Nazirite vow. He has touched a dead thing, and it's significant to understand that the jawbone was a fresh jawbone because an old one would have been brittle and wouldn't have been able to be used to kill 1,000 men. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. So we see that Samson does have a sense of poetry and humour, and his antics suggest that he appears to be a man of a cruel sense of humour, but a clever sense of rhyme and poetry. Samson jeers at the Philistines. He slaughtered them with a jawbone of a donkey. So the Hebrew word for donkey is the same word that we translate for heaps in English. So we can see this in the NIV. In the NIV, it says, then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. I have made donkeys of them. But in the King James Version, that same line, I have made donkeys of them, that same line is translated as heaps upon heaps. So it's very different, but we can see that that word being used, that word donkey and that word being used heaps, translated a little bit differently. And so we can see the confusion in the translations of the Hebrew words hamor. And it can either mean donkey or heaps. And the translation from Hebrew to English for this word hamor has caused some confusion and has resulted in 2 different translations, as we have seen just simply between 2 different versions of the New King James Version and the NIV. But by using the Hebrew word hamor, meaning both donkey and heaps, several times in his taunt, Samson implies that he's not only killed the Philistines, that he has piled them up. And he's also shaming them by comparing them to donkeys. So a modern day rhyme might be like, with the jawbone of an ass, I have piled them up in a mass. So Samson takes credit again for the victory. He says, I have made donkeys out of them. He says, I have killed 1,000 men. However, he achieved this only because the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him. He failed to acknowledge God in the success. It's as though Samson forgot that his strength came from God, denying his influence in his life. Verse 17. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone at the place called Ramath-lehi. So Ramath-lehi, it actually means jawbone hill. Verse 18, because he was thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, Lord, you have given your servant great victory. Must I die of thirst and fall into the hands of this uncircumcised? Finally, he has reached the end of his strength. And when he's on the brink of exhaustion, he is dying of thirst. And he remembers the Lord. He acknowledges that it is the Lord that sort of has given him victory a bit. But it seems that Samson only remembers to worship God when he needs something. And remember this, because we'll see this again repeated a little bit later. 19, God opened up the hollow place of Lehi, and the water came out of it. And when Samson drank, his strength returned, and he was revived. So the spring was called El-Hakor, and it is still there in Lehi. En-Hakor is a spring which the Lord produced in response to Samson's complaint of being thirsty after he killed the 1,000 Philistines men with a jawbone of a donkey. And the name En-Hakor means caller's spring, or the spring of him who called, or the fountain of the crier. So Samson chose to name this spring, and in naming it El-Hakor, caller's spring, he again is attributing the miracle to himself. The name he chooses is a reflection of Samson's call and cry for help, not God's gracious provision. He could have called it, God is faithful, the Lord provides, the Lord answered my cry, but no, he names it, focusing on himself. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. That's verse 20, our last verse. So 20 years, it is a significant length of time to serve as a judge in Israel. And whether he did it honourably or with integrity or not, he still gave 2 decades of his life to lead God's people and protect them from the Philistines. And God still demonstrates that he uses imperfect people to show his sovereignty. And that's all I have today for you from Judges chapter 15. It's been a pleasure spending time with you, and I look forward to the next time we'll be together when we look at Samson again in Judges chapter 16. Bye.